Welcome, weary traveller, to the drowsy jester. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. The medieval world was filled with wonder and mystery. Dragons guarded treasure, saints performed miracles, and the line between the possible and impossible was far thinner than we imagine today. These weren't just stories told around the fire, they were beliefs that shaped how people understood their world. Tonight, we'll explore what medieval people actually believed and discover why these myths made perfect sense to them. If these gentle journeys through history bring you peace, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other restless souls find their way here too. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders drop, and let's begin our wandering. Medieval people believed dragons were real, not metaphorical, not symbolic real, living creatures that could be encountered in distant lands or deep caves. Dragons appeared in bestiaries, those medieval encyclopedias of animals, right alongside elephants and lions. Scholars described their appearance, their habits, even their weaknesses. They were part of the natural world, just rarely seen, like certain exotic beasts from distant realms. The line between what we now call myth and what medieval people called natural history was remarkably thin. If travelers returned from distant lands with stories of enormous reptiles, why wouldn't people believe in dragons? After all, the world was vast, largely unexplored, and filled with genuine wonders. St. George slaying a dragon wasn't viewed as fantasy. It was history. A real saint, a real dragon, a real victory of faith over evil. The story was told and retold, painted on church walls, carved into stone. Children grew up believing it happened just as surely as they believed in the kingdoms of France or England. Now, let's drift to a belief that touched daily life even more directly. Medieval people believed that precious stones had healing powers, not in some vague, mystical sense, but specific, practical medical applications. Emeralds were thought to strengthen eyesight and protect against epilepsy. Sapphires could cure ulcers and reduce fevers. Rubies prevented plague and purified blood. These weren't folk superstitions dismissed by educated people. Physicians prescribed gemstones as medical treatment. Wealthy patients wore them. Healers ground them into powders. The logic made sense within medieval understanding. If God created stones with such remarkable beauty and hardness, surely they possessed other special properties. Everything in creation had a purpose. Stones that endured forever must contain some essence of strength and healing. This brings us to the doctrine of signatures, a belief that shaped medieval medicine and botany. People believed God marked plants with signs indicating their medicinal uses. A walnut, which resembles a brain, must be good for head ailments. Yellow flowers must treat yellow bile and jaundice. Heart-shaped leaves must heal heart conditions. This wasn't considered superstition. It was divine design. God, in His mercy, had created a world where healing plants revealed their purposes through their appearance. All you needed was the wisdom to read the signs. Herbalists studied plants carefully, looking for these divine signatures, certain they were uncovering God's intended order. Imagine the comfort in this belief, a world where healing was literally written into nature, visible to anyone who knew how to look, a world designed with human well-being in mind. Medieval people believed in the existence of places called antipodes, lands on the opposite side of the earth, where everything was upside down. This wasn't considered impossible. The earth was round. Educated medieval people knew this. If the earth was round, then surely there were lands on the far side, beneath your feet as you stood. But here was the puzzle that troubled scholars. How did people on the Antipodes avoid falling off? How did they walk upside down? Some believed no one lived there. Others imagined people with different physical properties, perhaps feet turned backwards, perhaps lighter bodies that could grip the ground differently. The debate was genuine. Serious scholars wrote treatises on the problem. The Antipodes challenged medieval understanding of gravity and the natural order. It would be centuries before the concept of gravity as we understand it resolved the paradox. Picture this. A medieval scholar standing under the night sky, trying to imagine people walking upside down on the other side of the world. Not mocking the idea, but genuinely puzzling over how it might work. The limits of human knowledge creating space for wonder. Let's journey now into medieval maps, because they revealed what people truly believed about the world's geography. Medieval mapmakers placed Jerusalem at the center of the world not for symbolic reasons, but because they believed it truly was the geographical center. Paradise, the Garden of Eden, was typically drawn at the eastern edge of the world, often as an actual, physical island that one might theoretically reach. These maps included places people believed were real: the kingdom of Prester John, a Christian monarch ruling somewhere in the east, rich beyond measure and ruling justly. Searching for his kingdom became a real goal of exploration. Letters were supposedly exchanged with him. His existence wasn't questioned. Far to the north were lands where the sun barely set in summer, where strange peoples lived by different customs. To the south were realms so hot that people's skin turned black from the sun, lands rich with gold and strange beasts. These geographical beliefs shaped exploration, trade routes, crusades, diplomatic missions. The world was both smaller and larger than we imagine. Smaller in known territory, larger in possibility. Medieval people believed that mandrake plants screamed when pulled from the ground, and that hearing the scream would drive you mad or kill you. This belief was so widespread that herbalists developed elaborate precautions. The standard method involved tying a dog to the plant, then calling the dog from a safe distance. The dog would pull up the mandrake, supposedly hearing the deadly scream in the harvester's place. Why did people believe this? Mandrake roots often grow in vaguely human shapes, with branches suggesting arms and legs. Something that looks so eerily human must possess unusual properties. The scream was an explanation for the plant's strangeness, a warning about its power. And mandrake was genuinely powerful. It contains compounds that cause hallucinations and unconsciousness. People who harvested it took genuine risks. The scream myth was a way of encoding that danger, making it memorable, treating the plant with appropriate caution. Here's something remarkable about medieval astronomy. People believed the stars were fixed to invisible crystalline spheres that rotated around the Earth. Not metaphorically, physically real spheres made of a substance transparent and pure, producing actual music as they moved. The music of the spheres wasn't poetic language. It was thought to be real sound, just beyond human hearing. Educated people debated the number of spheres, their speeds, their sizes. It was sophisticated astronomy, internally consistent, making accurate predictions about star positions. The model worked. It explained what people observed in the night sky. Standing under the stars, medieval observers believed they were watching a vast, intricate celestial mechanism, perfectly designed, moving to actual harmonies. Every night was a symphony, even if human ears couldn't quite perceive it. Let that settle for a moment. Imagine believing the stars sang. Medieval people believed that certain saints had the power to protect against specific dangers, and they called upon these saints constantly in daily life. Saint Christopher protected travelers. Saint Agatha protected against fire and lightning. Saint Apollonia protected against toothache. Saint Blaise protected against throat ailments. This wasn't casual belief. People wore medals, said prayers, made pilgrimages, all to secure protection from their patron saints. The logic was clear. Saints had lived holy lives and now dwelled with God. They could intercede on behalf of the living. Why wouldn't you call upon them? It would be foolish not to seek their protection. Dangerous, even. A merchant setting out on a journey without praying to Saint Christopher would be considered reckless. A mother whose child had a sore throat would immediately invoke Saint Blaise. These weren't superstitions, they were practical precautions, as sensible as locking your door at night. Faith and practicality weren't separate. They were woven together into daily survival. Now, drift with me to a medieval belief about the natural world. People believed that barnacle geese grew from barnacles attached to driftwood, not metaphorically, literally grew from shellfish. Observers noted that these geese appeared in northern regions without ever being seen to nest or lay eggs. The explanation? They must have another form of generation. Monks living near the sea reported seeing barnacles with feather-like tendrils. When these barnacles matured, they supposedly opened to release fully formed geese. This solved the mystery of where the geese came from. It also created a theological debate. Were barnacle geese birds or fish? Could they be eaten during Lent, when meat was forbidden but fish was allowed? Scholars genuinely debated this question. Church authorities issued rulings. The classification of barnacle geese had practical religious implications. What seems absurd to us was a reasonable explanation for a genuine mystery, solved with the best available observations and logic. Medieval people believed in the existence of dog-headed men, called cynocephaly. These weren't monsters in the sense we might imagine. They were believed to be actual human peoples living in distant lands, differing from Europeans only in having dogs' heads instead of human heads. Travelers' accounts described them. They appeared in serious geographical texts. The question scholars debated wasn't whether cynocephaly existed, but whether they had souls. Could they be baptized? Were they descendants of Adam? The theological implications were considered carefully. This belief reveals something important about medieval worldview. The edges of the known world were permeable, filled with variations on humanity. Just as people varied in skin color and customs, why not in other physical features? God's creation was diverse. Dog-headed men fit within that diversity. The world was stranger and more varied than we can easily imagine. What we call impossible, medieval people called simply distant. Let's journey now into weather beliefs. Medieval people believed that storms, droughts, and other extreme weather could be caused by witchcraft or demonic influence. A sudden hailstorm destroying crops wasn't just bad luck, it might be malicious magic. This belief had serious consequences. When harvests failed, when livestock died, when wells ran dry, people looked for someone to blame. But there's an important nuance here. Not every bad storm was blamed on witchcraft. People understood natural weather patterns. They expected winter to be cold, summer to be dry, spring to bring rain. It was the unusual, the unseasonable, the particularly destructive weather that seemed supernatural. In a world without meteorology, without understanding of atmospheric pressure and weather systems, this explanation made sense. If priests could bless fields to improve crops, surely malevolent powers could curse them. The logic was consistent with medieval understanding of how spiritual forces interacted with the physical world. Church bells were often rung during storms, believed to drive away demons causing the bad weather. This wasn't mindless superstition, it was practical response to perceived danger. Medieval people believed that unicorns were real, and their horns could purify poisoned water. Not metaphorical unicorns, actual animals, rare and valuable, living in distant lands. When traders offered unicorn horns for sale, wealthy nobles bought them eagerly, grinding them into powder to detect or neutralize poison. These horns were actually narwhal tusks, imported from Arctic waters, but medieval people had no way to know this. They had descriptions of unicorns from ancient texts. They had genuine specimens of spiraled horns. The connection seemed obvious. Kings kept unicorn horns among their most precious treasures. They used them to test food and drink for poison. The belief in unicorn horns wasn't foolish. Poison was a genuine danger for powerful people, and any protection was valuable. Some of these horns still exist in museums and treasuries. Beautiful, spiraling narwhal tusks, once worth more than gold, believed to be proof that unicorns walked the earth. Breathe that in for a moment. The medieval world where unicorns were simply rare, not imaginary. Now let's explore a medieval belief about human anatomy. People believed that the womb could wander around inside a woman's body, causing various ailments. This wasn't considered unusual or supernatural, it was standard medical knowledge, inherited from ancient Greek physicians and taught in medieval universities. When women experienced symptoms we might now recognize as anxiety, depression, or other conditions, physicians diagnosed wandering womb. Treatments attempted to lure the womb back to its proper position using pleasant scents near the groin and unpleasant scents near the face. This belief reveals something important about medieval medicine. It was systematic, logical, within its own framework, taught by serious scholars. It wasn't random folk belief, it was official medical doctrine. Wrong, certainly, but wrong in ways that seemed reasonable given limited anatomical knowledge. Medieval physicians were doing their best with inherited knowledge and limited ability to study internal anatomy. They observed symptoms, applied theories, tried to help. The wandering womb theory was their attempt to explain real suffering and find treatments. Medieval people believed that the world would end in the year 1000 AD. This belief is often exaggerated in modern retellings, but many people did expect significant apocalyptic events as the millennium approached. As the year 1000 drew near, some people gave away possessions, made pilgrimages to Jerusalem, sought forgiveness for sins, prepared for Christ's return. But here's what's fascinating. When the year 1000 passed uneventfully, people recalculated. Perhaps it should be counted from Christ's death, not his birth. Perhaps 1033 was the significant date. This reveals something important about prophecy and belief. When predictions fail, belief often finds a way to adjust rather than disappear. The year 1033 also passed. Life continued. Prophets reinterpreted their timelines. The world, it turned out, would end at God's choosing, not according to human calculation. This belief shaped a generation, influenced decisions, created anxiety and hope. Then, quietly, it faded into recalculation. Let's drift now to medieval beliefs about precious relics. People believed that the bones and possessions of saints retained miraculous power, not symbolic power, real physical power to heal, protect, and perform miracles. A splinter from the true cross, a bone from a martyred saint, a piece of cloth that touched holy remains, these objects were treated as batteries of divine power. Churches competed to acquire relics. Pilgrims traveled vast distances to visit them. Kings paid fortunes for them. Wars were fought over them. When a city possessed a powerful relic, everyone believed it was genuinely safer, more blessed, more likely to prosper. Were all relics authentic? Almost certainly not. The number of true cross splinters alone suggested either a very large cross or considerable fraud, but the belief in relics' power was genuine and widespread. From peasants to popes, people believed they worked. And sometimes, belief itself has power. If touching a saint's bone gave you hope, strength, comfort, did it matter whether the bone was authentic? Medieval people would have said yes, absolutely. Modern observers might wonder. Medieval people believed that Jews murdered Christian children to use their blood in religious rituals. This belief, called blood libel, was horrifically false and led to terrible persecutions. But people believed it. Communities accused Jewish neighbors based on this belief. Riots began, murders were committed. Why mention this dark belief? Because understanding medieval minds means acknowledging their prejudices as well as their wonders. Medieval people were capable of remarkable scholarship, art, and philosophy. They were also capable of believing dangerous lies about their neighbors. This belief reveals how fear and misunderstanding could be codified into doctrine, how religious difference could become cause for persecution. It wasn't universal. Many medieval authorities condemned these accusations, but it spread widely enough to cause real harm. The medieval world contained both incredible beauty and terrible cruelty, often existing side by side. Let's turn to something gentler. Medieval people believed that swallows spent winter at the bottom of ponds and lakes. This wasn't random speculation, it was offered as the solution to a genuine mystery. Where did swallows go in winter? They vanished in autumn, returned in spring, but no one saw them during winter. The pond theory explained their disappearance. Unable to imagine migration over vast distances, unable to track bird movements across continents, medieval observers proposed what seemed logical. The birds must be hiding somewhere nearby. Ponds froze in winter, protecting the sleeping swallows below the ice. Some claimed to have seen swallows rise from lakes in spring. Others found proof in birds pulled from winter ponds. The explanation satisfied curiosity and matched limited observations. We smile at this now, knowing about migration. But medieval people were doing what humans always do, creating explanations that fit available evidence and possibilities they could imagine. Medieval people believed in the power of prayer to change physical reality, not just spiritual reality, physical events. Farmers prayed for rain and believed specific prayers to specific saints could actually cause rain to fall. Soldiers prayed for victory, believing divine intervention could turn battles. This wasn't considered supernatural in the way we might think. God controlled nature. Prayer was communication with God. Why wouldn't communication with the creator of the universe affect creation? The strange thing would be if it didn't. Churches organized prayer vigils during droughts. Communities processed with sacred relics to bring rain. When rain eventually came, as it always eventually did, the prayers were credited. When it didn't, perhaps the prayers weren't faithful enough, or God had other plans. Cause and effect, action and result, prayer and outcome, these connections were genuine to medieval minds. Picture this, an entire village, processing through fields, singing prayers for rain, absolutely certain their voices were being heard, that response was possible, that faith had practical power. Now, let's explore medieval beliefs about the moon. People believed the moon affected more than just tides. It influenced health, agriculture, human behavior, even the success of various activities. Surgeons avoided operating during certain moon phases. Farmers planted crops according to moon cycles. People believed the moon could drive you mad, hence lunatic, from lunar, the moon. These beliefs weren't considered superstition. They were practical wisdom, passed down through generations, confirmed by observation and experience. Plant during the wrong moon phase, and your crops might fail. Ignore the moon's influence and pay the price. Modern research has found some accuracy in moon-related beliefs. Planting by moon phases affects root development in some crops. Medieval people didn't understand the mechanism, but they'd observed the pattern. Not everything medieval people believed about the moon was accurate, but the moon does affect Earth in real ways, and medieval observers were paying attention. Medieval people believed that demons could possess people, causing illness, madness, or evil behavior. Exorcism wasn't considered superstition, it was medical treatment for a genuine condition. Priests trained in exorcism learned the proper prayers and rituals, treated possession cases with seriousness and care. What we might now understand as mental illness, seizure disorders, or other medical conditions were interpreted through a spiritual framework. The symptoms were real, the tremors, the personality changes, the violent episodes. The explanation was demonic possession. The treatment was exorcism. Were medieval people wrong? Obviously, demons don't cause epilepsy, but they were observing real suffering and trying to help with the tools and understanding they had. Exorcism provided structure, hope, community support. Sometimes the rituals helped, not because demons left, but because human care and attention aided healing. The medieval world tried to heal suffering, even when it misunderstood causes. Let's journey now into medieval beliefs about pregnancy and childbirth. People believed that a mother's experiences, emotions, and sights during pregnancy could physically mark her child. If a pregnant woman was frightened by a rabbit, her child might be born with a cleft lip, called a hare lip. If she saw something beautiful, the child would be beautiful. This belief put enormous pressure on pregnant women to control their experiences, avoid shocking sights, maintain pleasant thoughts. Communities protected pregnant women from disturbing events. Women were advised to look at beautiful things, pleasant scenes. We know now that birthmarks and birth defects aren't caused by maternal impression, but the belief reveals medieval understanding of the connection between mother and developing child, the idea that the two were not separate but intimately connected, affecting each other in profound ways. In a way, the belief acknowledged something true. The mother's state does affect the developing child, just through different mechanisms than medieval people imagined. Medieval people believed that Eleanor of Aquitaine had been married to both the King of France and the King of England, had led armies, had sons who became kings. They believed this because it was completely true. But they also believed stories about her that weren't true, that she'd been unfaithful, that she'd poisoned rivals, that she'd plotted murders. History and legend blurred. Real people became legends even in their own lifetimes. Eleanor was so remarkable, so powerful, so unusual for a woman of her era, that her actual life seemed almost legendary. Additional legendary details simply attached to the core of truth. This pattern repeated throughout medieval history. Real people, William the Conqueror, Richard the Lionheart, Joan of Arc, accumulated legends during and after their lives. Medieval people believed some accurate stories and some embellished ones, often unable to distinguish between them. The line between history and legend was drawn differently. If a story captured essential truth about a person's character, did it matter whether every detail was accurate? Now, breathe deeply, and let's explore a quieter belief. Medieval people believed that bees died if their keeper died without the bees being told. This custom, called telling the bees, was practiced widely. When the keeper of beehives died, someone had to go to the hives, knock gently, and inform the bees of their keeper's death. Otherwise, the bees would leave or die themselves. This belief reveals medieval understanding of relationships between humans and animals. Bees weren't just livestock, they were part of the household, deserving respect and communication. The belief encoded care for the hives during the emotional disruption of death, ensuring someone paid attention to them. Was it true? Would bees actually die if not told? Almost certainly not. But the ritual ensured the bees were tended during a time when they might otherwise be forgotten. The belief produced good practical results. Some beekeepers still tell the bees when important events happen. Not because they believe the bees will die, but because the tradition connects them to centuries of beekeepers before them. Medieval people believed that names had power. Your true name could be used against you in magic or curses. This is why many people had multiple names, a baptismal name for official records, a use name for daily life, perhaps a family name used only by intimates. Knowing someone's true name meant having power over them. Demons could be controlled if you knew their names. Saints could be called upon more effectively if you used their correct full names. Even in official documents, people sometimes used formulaic names rather than their actual daily names. This belief shaped medieval identity and privacy. You protected your name like you might protect your possessions. You shared it carefully. Intimate relationships were partly defined by which name you were called. Language and identity, words and power, names and self, these connections ran deep in medieval understanding. Let's drift to medieval beliefs about animals. People believed that pelicans fed their young with their own blood, piercing their breasts to provide nourishment. This belief appeared in bestiaries, was carved into church decorations, became a symbol of Christ's sacrifice. People genuinely believed pelicans did this. The belief probably arose from observation of real pelican behavior. Pelicans store fish in their throat pouches, then regurgitate it to feed their young. From a distance, seeing red fish emerge from a pelican's breast area, medieval observers interpreted this as the bird piercing itself. The explanation seemed logical, the symbolism was powerful, and the belief became widespread. Similarly, people believed phoenixes were real birds that lived for centuries, then burned themselves on funeral pyres and were reborn from the ashes. They believed salamanders could live in fire. They believed basilisks could kill with a glance. Each belief arose from some combination of misunderstood observation, imported stories from ancient texts, and the medieval tendency to see the natural world as filled with wonders and divine messages. Medieval people believed that thunder was caused by clouds colliding. This explanation wasn't unreasonable. Thunder accompanied storms. Storms involved dramatic cloud movements. The connection seemed clear. Some theories involved angels moving clouds around. Others proposed natural forces causing the collisions. Lightning was more mysterious. Some believed it was divine fire. Others thought it was a substance released during the collision of clouds. A few scholars proposed electrical theories remarkably close to reality, though they lacked the framework to fully understand. These weather theories were serious science for their time, attempts to understand natural phenomena using available knowledge and observations. Wrong in details, but right in approach. Observe, theorize, explain. Medieval people stood watching storms, constructing explanations, trying to understand their world, just as we do, just with different tools. Now let's journey to beliefs about glass. Medieval people believed that glass was actually a very slow-flowing liquid. Look at old church windows, they noted, and you'll see the glass thicker at the bottom than at the top. Obviously, the glass has been slowly flowing downward over centuries. This belief persisted for generations, supported by observable evidence. Old glass did indeed seem thicker at the bottom. The explanation seemed logical. Modern analysis shows this interpretation was wrong. The uneven thickness resulted from medieval glass-making techniques and installation methods. Glassmakers couldn't create perfectly uniform sheets, and installers often placed the thicker edge at the bottom for stability. But the observation was correct: old glass is unevenly thick. The theory explaining it was logical. Medieval people were good observers, making reasonable conclusions from available evidence. Medieval people believed in the concept of the 7 deadly sins having physical manifestations. Pride made your face flush. Envy made your skin turn green. Wrath showed in your eyes. These weren't just metaphors. People believed sin literally affected your physical appearance. This belief connected moral and physical health in ways we might now consider simplistic, but it reflected medieval understanding that body, mind, and soul were interconnected. What affected one affected all. Sin wasn't just spiritual corruption, it was total corruption. The belief had practical effects. People watched each other for signs of sin. They examined their own appearances for evidence of moral failings. Confession and penance weren't just spiritual exercises, they were health measures, treating total well-being. In a world without understanding of psychology, this framework made sense. It attempted to explain the connections between emotional states and physical appearance that we still observe today. Let's explore medieval beliefs about the sea. People believed the ocean at the equator was boiling hot, making it impossible to sail there. The logic seemed sound. The sun was strongest at the equator, therefore the water must boil. No ship could cross that barrier. The southern hemisphere was unreachable. This belief shaped medieval geography and limited exploration. Why sail south if you'd eventually reach boiling seas? The tropical regions were thought to be uninhabitable, too hot for human survival. When Portuguese explorers finally sailed far enough south to test this theory, they discovered it was wrong. The equatorial regions weren't boiling. Life flourished there. The world was larger and more accessible than believed. But until someone actually tested the theory, it seemed perfectly reasonable. Hot climates were genuinely hot. Extending that logic to an extreme produced the boiling sea theory. Medieval people believed that spiders were venomous and dangerous. In one sense, this is true, spiders do have venom. But medieval people believed spider venom could kill adult humans easily, that spiders actively sought out people to bite, that they were malicious creatures. This belief came partly from occasional genuine spider bites causing reactions, partly from ancient texts warning about spiders, partly from the spider's unsettling appearance and movements. The solution was to kill spiders on sight, avoid them carefully, never let them touch your food. In reality, almost all spiders are harmless to humans. The few dangerous species are regional and avoidable, but medieval people didn't differentiate species. All spiders were threatening. The belief protected against the rare, dangerous spider at the cost of killing countless harmless ones. Medieval people believed that Edward the Confessor, English king and saint, could cure scrofula by touching sufferers. Scrofula, a form of tuberculosis affecting the lymph nodes, was called the king's evil because only a king's touch could cure it. This belief didn't end in the Middle Ages. It continued for centuries. Hundreds of people lined up to be touched by the king, believing absolutely that the royal touch carried healing power. Did it work? Some patients did recover, as some tuberculosis patients do, regardless of treatment. Those recoveries reinforced the belief. The royal touch wasn't considered supernatural in the way we might think. Kings were anointed by God. They ruled by divine right. Why wouldn't their touch carry divine healing? The logic was consistent with medieval political and religious theory. Imagine the faith required to travel hundreds of miles, wait in line for hours, for a brief touch from a king's hand. Imagine believing absolutely that touch would heal you. Now, let's drift to beliefs about comets. Medieval people saw comets as omens of disaster, war, famine, plague, the death of kings. This wasn't astrology in the modern sense. People believed comets were divine warnings, signs God sent to prepare humanity for coming trials. When a comet appeared, communities prepared for hardship. Some rulers delayed military campaigns. People prayed more fervently, examined their consciences, made peace with neighbors. The comet's appearance created genuine social effects regardless of whether disaster followed. Sometimes disaster did follow by chance, or because people's anxious responses created self-fulfilling prophecies. Sometimes nothing happened, and the comet's meaning was reinterpreted. But the belief that heaven sent signs to earth was core to medieval worldview. The sky and ground weren't separate. Divine messages appeared in natural phenomena. Medieval people believed that the world was organized into hierarchies that reflected divine order. Angels above humans, humans above animals, animals above plants, plants above minerals. Within humanity, kings above nobles, nobles above commoners, men above women, parents above children. This wasn't just social organization, it was cosmic structure. To challenge these hierarchies was to challenge God's design. Rebellion against a king was rebellion against divine order. Disorder in society meant disorder in the universe. This belief provided stability and justified inequality. It gave everyone a place, even if that place was low. It made sense of suffering. God ordered the world this way for reasons beyond human understanding. Modern values reject these hierarchies, but medieval people found meaning and structure in them, a framework for understanding their place in creation. Let's explore beliefs about memory. Medieval people believed memory could be improved by associating information with physical locations. They imagined elaborate memory palaces, mental buildings where each room contained specific memories. This technique, called the method of loci, wasn't just practice. They believed memory literally worked this way. And remarkably, they were right. Modern cognitive science confirms that associating memories with spatial locations significantly improves recall. Medieval scholars who memorized entire books by mentally walking through imagined buildings were using a technique that genuinely works. They didn't understand the neuroscience, but through experimentation and experience, they'd discovered an effective method. Their theory of how memory worked was incomplete, but their practical technique was sound. Medieval monks memorizing scriptures, scholars memorizing speeches, students memorizing texts. They walked through imaginary rooms, their minds filled with architectural memories. Medieval people believed that certain numbers had sacred significance. 7 was holy, 7 days of creation, 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues. 3 represented the Trinity, 12 represented the apostles. 40 represented testing and trial, 40 days in the desert, 40 days of Lent. These numbers appeared everywhere by design. Churches were built with symbolically significant numbers of windows, pillars, steps. Prayers were repeated 7 times, 3 times, 12 times. Penances lasted 40 days. This wasn't numerology in a mystical sense. These numbers were believed to reflect divine structure. Using them honored God's design. The universe was mathematical, ordered, meaningful. Numbers were part of that meaning. A medieval person would notice that our modern week has 7 days and see confirmation. The sacred structure persists, even when we forget why. Medieval people believed that Jerusalem was the literal center of the earth, the point where Christ's blood touched ground, the place where human and divine met most directly. Jerusalem wasn't just spiritually important, it was geographically, physically central. Maps reflected this belief. Medieval cartographers placed Jerusalem in the exact center of their world maps. East was at the top, the direction of paradise. Europe and Asia and Africa radiated from Jerusalem at the center. This wasn't ignorance of geography. It was a different way of understanding what center meant. Not the geometrical center, the meaningful center, the place that mattered most. The point around which everything else was organized. Modern maps place different locations at the center based on different priorities. We all make maps reflecting our values and understanding. Let's drift now to beliefs about education. Medieval people believed that physical punishment helped learning. The phrase "beat it into them" wasn't metaphorical. Teachers genuinely believed that pain helped memory, that discipline of the body educated the mind. Students were beaten for incorrect answers, for forgetting lessons, for inattention. This wasn't considered abuse, it was educational technique, supported by tradition and theory. Scripture said, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." Experience seemed to confirm that students learned faster when consequences were painful. Modern understanding rejects this approach, showing it actually impairs learning. but medieval teachers believed they were helping students, using the best methods they knew. The belief reveals how practices can seem reasonable within one framework and cruel in another. Medieval people believed that the sun rotated around the earth. Every observation supported this. You could see the sun rise in the east, travel across the sky, set in the west. The earth felt stationary. The sun obviously moved. Scholars created elaborate mathematical models of the sun's motion, accounting for seasonal variations, predicting positions with remarkable accuracy. The geocentric model worked. It made predictions. It explained observations. When a few scholars proposed that Earth might orbit the sun instead, the idea seemed absurd. How could the Earth be moving when you couldn't feel it move? Why would God put Earth anywhere except the center of creation? It took centuries and new observations to overturn this belief. Medieval people weren't stupid for believing the Earth stood still. All their direct experience supported it. Medieval people believed that witches could steal men's penises. This belief appeared in serious theological texts, legal documents, witch trial records. People testified that witches had taken their penises, keeping them in baskets or nests, where the stolen organs continued to move and live. Modern understanding recognizes these accounts as describing psychological conditions, mass hysteria, or deliberate fraud. But medieval people believed the testimonies. They executed women based on these accusations. This belief reveals the medieval connection between sexuality, magic, and spiritual danger. It shows how genuine psychological experiences could be interpreted through a framework of witchcraft and demonic power. It also shows how horrifically wrong beliefs could lead to real violence against real people. Now, let's journey to a gentler belief. Medieval people believed that certain people could heal with touch, not through divine power but natural ability. These were the seventh sons of seventh sons, or people born with birthmarks indicating healing power, or people who had survived drowning. Communities brought sick children to these folk healers. They touched wounds, whispered charms, offered herbal remedies. Some patients recovered. The healers' reputations grew. Faith in natural healing magic existed alongside Christian healing through saints and relics. This belief reveals medieval pluralism. Multiple frameworks for understanding healing coexisted. You might pray to Saint Apollonia for toothache, but also visit the seventh son healer. You might have a priest bless water, but also consult the wise woman who understood herbs. Medieval people used every available resource to address suffering. Medieval people believed that madness could be cured by trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to release evil spirits or excess humors causing mental disturbance. Surgical tools specifically designed for this procedure have been found. Skulls showing partially healed trepanation holes prove people survived the surgery. The theory was logical within medieval medicine. Madness was caused by something wrong inside the head. Release the pressure, release the evil influence. The skull would heal around the hole. Was it effective? Almost certainly not, for mental illness. But some patients did survive. Some seemed to improve, perhaps because the attention and care during recovery helped, perhaps through placebo effect, perhaps by random chance. Medieval surgeons were doing their best to help, using the understanding and techniques available to them. Let's explore beliefs about iron. Medieval people believed that iron had protective properties against evil spirits and fairies. Blacksmiths were respected partly because they worked with this protective metal. Horseshoes over doorways weren't just decorative, they actively protected the home. Pregnant women wore iron amulets. Cribs had iron nails. Travelers carried iron items. The metal was believed to create a barrier that supernatural entities couldn't cross. This belief was practical. Iron was valuable, associated with strength and permanence, essential for tools and weapons. Elevating it to spiritual protection made sense. The blacksmith's forge, with its fire and transformation of metal, seemed almost magical itself. Touch an old horseshoe over a door, and you're touching a tradition of protection that stretches back centuries. Medieval people believed that the Shroud of Turin was the actual burial cloth of Christ, bearing the miraculous imprint of his body. Pilgrims traveled from across Europe to view it. It was one of Christianity's most precious relics, proof of the resurrection. Modern carbon dating suggests the shroud dates to medieval times, not to Christ's era, but medieval people had no such technology. They had a cloth that appeared ancient, that seemed to show the image of a crucified man, that inspired devotion and faith. Whether the shroud is authentic hardly mattered to the millions who found comfort and confirmation in viewing it. The belief in its authenticity shaped medieval faith and pilgrimage. Some believers still dispute the carbon dating. The power of relics to inspire faith continues. Medieval people believed in the existence of green children. In one famous account from 12th century England, 2 green-skinned children appeared in a village, speaking an unknown language, eating only beans. Gradually, they lost their green color, learned English, explained they came from an underground land where the sun never shone. Was this story true? Probably not as described. Various theories suggest the children might have been orphaned. Flemish immigrants, suffering from green sickness, anemia, disoriented and traumatized. But medieval people believed the account mysterious strangers from an unknown realm. The story reveals openness to wonder, willingness to believe in other realms and peoples existing alongside the known world. The edges of the map weren't empty, they were filled with possibilities. Now, breathe deeply. Let's drift toward our journey's end with a few more beliefs. Medieval people believed that teaching women to read was dangerous. Knowledge could corrupt them, make them dissatisfied with their proper roles, give them ideas beyond their station. Some authorities argued that reading enabled women to write love letters, plot infidelities, learn magic. This belief obviously served to maintain male power and control, but it was genuinely believed, encoded in practice and law. Most women remained illiterate, excluded from formal education. Yet many women learned anyway in convents, from family members, through determination. Women scholars, mystics, and writers existed despite the belief that female literacy was dangerous. The belief reveals medieval anxieties about knowledge, power, and gender roles. Medieval people believed that rainbows were divine promises, literal signs from God, referencing Noah's flood. This was biblical, of course, so the belief had scriptural foundation. But they believed rainbows were supernatural, not natural, God creating them individually as reminders, not light refracting through water droplets. Some believed walking under a rainbow could bring blessings or curses depending on your spiritual state. Others believed you could find treasure at a rainbow's end, placed there by God or fairy folk. The rainbow wasn't just beautiful, it was meaningful, purposeful, a direct message from heaven to earth. Every child chasing a rainbow's end was chasing something more than light and water. They were chasing divine promise made visible. Medieval people believed that certain fish could live both in water and on land, that some fish had fur instead of scales, that fish didn't feel pain because they were cold-blooded. These beliefs shaped how fish were classified religiously. Some creatures we consider seafood were classified as fish for purposes of Lenten fasting. Beavers were classified as fish because they lived in water and had scaly tails. Barnacle geese, as we mentioned, were sometimes considered fish because they came from the sea. Puffins were fish because they spent so much time in water. These classifications weren't just taxonomic mistakes, they had practical religious implications. If beavers were fish, you could eat beaver during Lent. The theology shaped the biology, or at least the classification. Medieval monks debating whether a duck was fowl or fish weren't being ridiculous, they were working out real questions about religious practice. Medieval people believed that history was cyclical, that kingdoms rose and fell in patterns, that human nature never changed. They looked to Roman history, Greek history, biblical history as guides for understanding their own times. The past wasn't distant, it was present, offering lessons and warnings. When medieval chroniclers wrote about contemporary events, they deliberately echoed classical histories. When they described their own kings, they used language from Caesar or Alexander. This wasn't just literary style, they genuinely believed that history repeated itself, that studying the past revealed the future. The Roman Empire's fall warned about decadence and moral decay. Biblical kingdoms' destruction taught about divine justice. Medieval people saw themselves in these ancient stories, believed they faced the same challenges, would meet similar fates. This cyclical view of time contrasts with our modern sense of progress. Medieval people didn't necessarily believe the future would be better than the past. Often, they believed it would be worse, that the world was aging, declining, approaching its end. Medieval people believed that alchemy, transforming base metals into gold, was genuinely possible. This wasn't considered magic in the supernatural sense, but natural philosophy, understanding and directing the processes by which God had created the world. Alchemists believed all metals were composed of different proportions of mercury and sulfur. Find the right process, the right proportions, the right purification, and you could transform lead into gold. The work was difficult, requiring knowledge, patience, spiritual purity, but fundamentally possible. Kings funded alchemical research. Scholars devoted lifetimes to it. The belief wasn't foolish greed, it was based on reasonable theories about matter, supported by ancient texts, pursued through experimental method. Alchemy failed to create gold, but it developed crucial laboratory techniques, discovered important chemical processes, laid groundwork for modern chemistry. The belief was wrong about the goal, but right about the approach: careful experimentation, detailed recording, systematic investigation. Medieval people believed that sins of the father passed to children, that entire bloodlines could be cursed, that you inherited not just property but spiritual debts from your ancestors. This belief made genealogy intensely important. Your family's past shaped your present in spiritual, not just social, terms. If your grandfather committed terrible sins, you might suffer consequences. If your ancestor performed great holy works, you might benefit from their stored merit. Family history was spiritual accounting, tracking debts and credits across generations. This belief created pressure to know your lineage, to understand family history, to make peace with ancestral wrongs. It also justified aristocratic privilege. Noble families claimed their ancestors' virtue entitled them to power. The concept that children shouldn't be blamed for parents' sins existed in Scripture. But the belief that spiritual consequences echoed through generations persisted, shaping how people understood family, identity, and destiny. Medieval people believed that certain words had magical power, independent of their meaning. Saying specific Latin phrases could protect against evil, heal, sickness, control, weather. These weren't prayers exactly, they were power words, effective because of their sounds and structure, not just their meaning. Abracadabra, written in diminishing triangular form, was believed to cure fever. Specific biblical verses used as charms protected travelers. Names of angels or saints, correctly pronounced, could command spiritual forces. This belief in linguistic magic existed alongside and sometimes despite church teachings about superstition. People distinguished between proper prayer, asking God for help, and using words as tools with inherent power. The belief reveals medieval understanding of language as more than communication. Words weren't just symbols, they had essence, power, effectiveness, independent of human understanding. Speaking the right words in the right way could change reality. Medieval people believed that virginity had physical markers that physicians could verify. Virginity wasn't just behavioral or moral, it was physically evident, provable through examination. Royal marriages, inheritance disputes, accusations of impropriety all potentially involved medical virginity testing. The methods for proving virginity were unreliable and invasive, based on misunderstandings of female anatomy. But the belief that virginity was physically demonstrable had real consequences, especially for women whose reputations, marriages, or lives might depend on such examinations. This belief gave physicians power over women's bodies and fates. It made women's worth partially dependent on physical proof of purity. It conflated spiritual virtue with bodily state in ways that created enormous pressure and anxiety. The belief reflects medieval obsession with purity, control of female sexuality, and the idea that inner states must have outer signs. Let's drift now to beliefs about time itself. Medieval people believed that some periods were more spiritually powerful than others. Holy days weren't just commemorations, they were times when the barrier between earth and heaven thinned, when prayers were more effective, when miracles were more likely. Similarly, certain hours of night and day had spiritual significance. Midnight was witching hour, when evil was strongest. Dawn was sacred, when light defeated darkness. Bells marked these spiritually significant times, organizing life around sacred rhythms. This belief meant that when you acted mattered as much as what you did. Prayers at midnight might be answered differently than prayers at dawn. Actions performed on holy days carried different weight than the same actions on ordinary days. Time wasn't neutral or uniform, it had texture, quality, spiritual dimension. Medieval people believed that left and right had moral significance. The right side was associated with good, virtue, heaven. The left side with evil, sin, hell. This wasn't just metaphor. Left-handed people were sometimes viewed with suspicion, their left-handedness seen as mark of potential evil. The English word sinister comes from the Latin word for left. The preference for the right hand, the positioning of important things on the right side, the symbolic weight given to right versus left all reflected this belief in moral geography. Some left-handed children were forced to use their right hands, not just for conformity but for their spiritual well-being. Being left-handed wasn't just different, it was potentially dangerous, spiritually suspect. This belief reveals how deeply morality was embedded in medieval understanding of physical reality. Even which hand you preferred had spiritual implications. Medieval people believed that reading pagan classical texts, Aristotle, Plato, Virgil, Ovid, could endanger your soul even while educating your mind. These ancient philosophers and poets wrote beautifully, thought deeply, but they weren't Christian. Their wisdom might lead you astray. Scholars struggled with this tension. Classical learning was essential for education, yet potentially spiritually dangerous. The solution was often allegorical interpretation, reading pagan texts as secretly Christian, finding hidden religious truths in Virgil's poetry or Aristotle's philosophy. Ovid's tales of metamorphosis could be read as parables of Christian transformation. Virgil's Aeneid could prefigure Christian pilgrimage. This interpretive work wasn't dishonest, it was believed that truth was truth, and classical wisdom must somehow accord with Christian truth, even if the authors didn't know it. The belief that pagan learning was both necessary and dangerous shaped medieval education, creating a tradition of careful reading, critical interpretation, and theological framing of classical texts. Medieval people believed that certain mathematical ratios reflected divine harmony. The golden ratio appeared in nature because God built it into creation's structure. Musical intervals that sounded harmonious did so because they reflected cosmic mathematical relationships. This belief made mathematics not just practical tool but theological study. Counting, measuring, calculating these activities revealed God's mind, understood the structure He'd imposed on creation. Geometry wasn't just about land measurement, it was about divine design. Church architects used specific ratios and numbers in cathedral construction, not just for structural integrity but for spiritual significance. The building itself became a mathematical prayer, its proportions reflecting heavenly order. When medieval scholars studied mathematics, they studied God's language, the logic underlying reality. Numbers had sacred weight, patterns had meaning beyond utility. Medieval people believed that Jews had horns and tails. This grotesque belief appeared in art, literature, popular imagination. It coded Jews as literally demonic, other, non-human. Combined with blood libel and other anti-Jewish beliefs, it justified discrimination and violence. This belief had no basis in reality. It was pure prejudice, weaponized to dehumanize. But it spread widely, shaped how Christians viewed Jewish neighbors, made persecution seem justified. Including this among medieval beliefs isn't to equate it with beliefs about dragons or wandering wombs. It's to acknowledge that medieval minds, capable of great learning and beauty, were also capable of terrible prejudice that caused real suffering. Understanding the medieval world means acknowledging both its wonders and its cruelties. Medieval people believed that mirrors could trap souls. When someone died, families covered or turned mirrors to the wall, fearing the departed soul might become trapped in the reflective surface, unable to move on to the afterlife. This wasn't just superstition, it was protective care for the deceased. Mirrors were mysterious objects. They showed your image but weren't you. They reflected reality but created something uncanny. In a world where the boundary between physical and spiritual was thin, mirrors seemed like portals or traps. This belief shaped funeral practices for centuries. Even today, some people follow this tradition, covering mirrors in houses of mourning, continuing a custom whose original meaning has faded but whose sense of respect remains. Medieval people believed that epilepsy was caused by demonic possession. Seizures were terrifying to witness the violent movements, the loss of consciousness, the physical danger. The explanation that demons were attacking seemed to make sense. The condition was called falling sickness, or the sacred disease, that second name acknowledging that perhaps divine forces, not just demonic ones, were involved. Treatment involved exorcism, prayer, pilgrimages to saints' shrines. Saint Valentine was the patron saint of epilepsy. People prayed to him for relief. Some remedies involved blessed objects or holy relics placed on the sufferer during seizures. Was this treatment effective? No, not for stopping epilepsy, but the community support, the framework for understanding a frightening condition, the hope that saints might help these things, helped families cope with a condition they couldn't cure. Medieval people believed that crocodile tears were real, that crocodiles wept while devouring their prey, crying from emotion or perhaps cruel pleasure. This belief came from ancient texts describing crocodile behavior. The phrase crocodile tears, meaning false sorrow, originated from this medieval belief. Very few medieval Europeans had ever seen a crocodile. They relied on travelers' tales and ancient authorities for information about exotic animals. If Pliny the Elder said crocodiles cried while eating, who were they to doubt? The image was vivid, memorable, morally instructive about false displays of emotion. The belief reveals how information about distant lands was transmitted through layers of retelling, interpretation, and embellishment, creating a bestiary of the imagination as much as observation. Let's drift to beliefs about childbirth. Medieval people believed that birthmarks and moles on a child revealed their future. A birthmark shaped like a sword meant the child would become a warrior. A mark resembling a crown indicated royal destiny. Dark moles in certain positions predicted wealth, love, tragedy. Midwives and wise women were consulted to interpret these signs. Parents examined their newborns carefully, looking for indications of what life held. The belief gave shape to anxiety and hope, offered predictions in an uncertain world. Some of these interpretations probably became self-fulfilling prophecies. A child marked for warrior status might be trained for combat. A child predicted to be wealthy might receive different treatment, different opportunities. The body as text, the future written on skin, this was medieval fortune-telling at its most intimate. Medieval people believed that cats, especially black cats, were associated with witchcraft and evil. Cats were thought to be witches' familiars, demonic spirits in animal form that assisted in magic. During witch persecutions, cats were killed alongside their owners. In some regions, cats were hunted and destroyed as a matter of public safety. This belief had terrible consequences. The mass killing of cats likely contributed to the spread of plague-carrying rats, since cats were no longer around to control rodent populations. Trying to eliminate one perceived danger created actual danger. But the belief made sense within medieval thinking. Cats were mysterious, independent, active at night, had strange eyes that reflected light. They didn't behave like dogs, loyal, obedient, clearly domesticated. Cats seemed to serve their own purposes, which made them seem potentially allied with dark forces. Even today, black cat superstitions persist, echoes of medieval fears. Medieval people believed in the existence of a creature called the vegetable lamb of Tartary. This was supposedly a plant that grew a lamb as its fruit. The lamb remained attached to the plant by a stem, grazed on surrounding vegetation within reach of its tether, and died when the nearby plants were consumed. This belief attempted to explain cotton, which medieval Europeans encountered but didn't fully understand. Traders brought cotton from distant lands. The fluffy material seemed to come from a plant but felt like lamb's wool. The vegetable lamb theory reconciled plant and animal, explaining something that seemed to cross categories. Scholars debated whether the lamb plant was vegetable or animal. If it ate grass, surely it was animal, but if it was rooted in soil, surely it was plant. The taxonomical puzzle was genuine, solved only when people understood cotton growing and processing. Now, picture this. Scholars earnestly debating whether a lamb growing on a plant stem had a soul. Medieval people believed that pearls formed from dewdrops swallowed by oysters. On moonlit nights, oysters supposedly surfaced and opened their shells, allowing perfect drops of moon-touched dew to enter. These drops crystallized into pearls over time. This poetic explanation for pearl formation reflected medieval love of symbolic meaning. Pearls were associated with purity, with the Virgin Mary, with heaven. Of course, they came from something as pure as dew, as mystical as moonlight. The explanation was aesthetically perfect, even if scientifically wrong. Pearls were enormously valuable. Their mysterious origins added to their worth. Knowing pearls came from something as delicate and rare as moon dew made them even more precious. The truth that pearls form around irritants inside oysters is actually quite beautiful too, just in a different way. Medieval people believed that certain plants could predict weather. If pine cones closed tight, rain was coming. If cows lay down in fields, storms approached. If flowers closed their petals before sunset, bad weather followed. These weren't old wives' tales, they were practical meteorology, passed down through generations of careful observation. And remarkably, many of these indicators actually work. Plants do respond to changes in humidity and air pressure that precede weather changes. Animals sense approaching storms through mechanisms we're still studying. Medieval farmers didn't understand the science, but they'd learned to read the signs. This knowledge was essential for survival. Knowing when storms would arrive meant protecting crops, bringing animals to shelter, securing property. The belief in plant and animal weather prediction was practical wisdom encoded in nature observation. Modern meteorology is more accurate, certainly, but standing in a field, watching pine cones close, feeling rain coming, that's knowledge that spans millennia. Medieval people believed that the eagle could look directly at the sun without harm, and that eagle parents tested their chicks by holding them toward the sun. Chicks that could look at the sun were kept. Those that looked away were rejected as illegitimate. This belief about eagles symbolized courage, divine connection, the ability to face truth directly. Eagles appeared on heraldic crests, in religious symbolism, representing Christ looking upon God's glory. The sun-gazing test represented spiritual strength. Was it true? No. Eagles don't test their young this way, but the belief encoded values, strength, courage, legitimate inheritance, connection to the divine. The eagle became more than a bird. It became an ideal. Medieval heraldry filled with eagles carried this symbolic weight, connecting noble families to these imagined qualities. Let's journey now to beliefs about the earth itself. Medieval people believed that certain locations were inherently holy or cursed. Places where miracles occurred became sacred. Locations where evil acts happened were tainted. The ground itself absorbed spiritual qualities from events. Pilgrimage sites were holy because saints had walked there, died there, were buried there. The physical location retained their holiness. Similarly, execution grounds, battlefields where terrible deeds occurred, crossroads where suicides were buried, these places were considered spiritually dangerous. This belief meant that location mattered intensely. Where you lived, where you traveled, where you were buried, all carried spiritual significance. Geography was theology. Churches were built on holy sites. New churches were deliberately constructed over pagan holy places, transferring the sanctity. The belief in sacred geography shaped medieval landscapes, architecture, settlement patterns. Medieval people believed that certain saints could perform specific miracles even after death, and that these miracles had patterns. Saint Lucy helped with eye problems because her eyes had been martyred. Saint Agatha protected against breast cancer and fire because her breasts had been cut off and she was martyred by fire. Saint Lawrence protected against burns because he was roasted alive on a gridiron. This pattern matching made logical sense. A saint who suffered a particular martyrdom would understand that suffering would be especially able to help with similar problems. The manner of their death became their specialty in helping the living. Pilgrims chose which saint to visit based on their needs. The saint's martyrdom story guided which prayers to offer, which relics to visit. The connection between suffering and healing, between martyrdom and miracle, was direct and practical. Medieval people believed that lodestones, magnetic rocks, had magical properties beyond their obvious ability to attract iron. They could reconcile married couples, attract love, strengthen warriors' courage, even grant invisibility if properly prepared. These weren't separate from their magnetic properties. The magnetism was evidence of other hidden powers. Magnets were genuinely mysterious. Their ability to affect metal at a distance seemed magical. In a world without electromagnetic theory, what else might they do? The leap from attracting iron to attracting love wasn't far. Lodestones were kept as precious objects. Ground into powder, they were used in potions and remedies. Carried as amulets, they were believed to protect and empower. The boundary between natural property and magical power was thin. We understand magnetism now, but standing with a lodestone pulling iron across a wooden table, you can feel why medieval people saw more than physics, they saw wonder. Medieval people believed in the doctrine of spontaneous generation, that life could arise from non-living matter. Mice generated from piles of grain. Maggots appeared spontaneously in rotting meat. Frogs formed from mud. Life didn't always require parents. It could simply appear under the right conditions. This belief was logical given what people observed. Leave grain in a corner, and eventually mice appear. Leave meat uncovered, and maggots manifest. The connection between eggs, larvae, and adult insects wasn't understood. The generation seemed spontaneous. This theory was taught in universities, supported by ancient authorities like Aristotle, confirmed by everyday observation. It wasn't ignorant superstition, it was mainstream science, wrong but reasonable given available evidence. The discovery that life always comes from prior life was revolutionary, overturning centuries of belief and observation. Medieval people believed that wolves could become werewolves, humans transforming into wolves, usually at the full moon. But they also believed that actual wolves posed spiritual danger beyond physical threat. A wolf looking at you before you saw it could strike you mute. Encountering a wolf was considered an omen. Wolves were genuinely dangerous to medieval communities. They attacked livestock, threatened travelers, represented wilderness and chaos at the edges of civilization. The belief in werewolves extended that danger into the supernatural realm. Some poor individuals suffering from mental illness, perhaps, or caught in the woods behaving strangely, were accused of being werewolves. Trials were held, executions occurred. The belief in transformation between human and animal had real, tragic consequences. In folklore and fact, wolves represented danger beyond the physical, chaos that could wear a human face. Let's drift to beliefs about music. Medieval people believed that music could heal illness, calm madness, influence the soul directly. Certain scales were thought to inspire courage. Others promoted virtue or generated melancholy. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was medicine, therapy, moral instruction. This belief had basis in experience. Music does affect mood, can calm anxiety, can energize or sadden. Medieval theorists created elaborate systems connecting musical modes to emotional and spiritual effects. David playing his harp to soothe King Saul's troubled spirit was biblical precedent. If music could calm divine madness, surely it had healing power. Medieval physicians prescribed listening to specific music for specific ailments. Modern music therapy confirms that medieval people were onto something. The mechanisms we understand differently, but the therapeutic effect of music is real. Medieval people believed that the mandrake root shrieking when pulled from the ground wasn't just folklore, we mentioned this earlier, but it's worth noting that detailed instructions existed for safe harvesting. On the night of a full moon, you would dig around the mandrake, being careful not to uproot it completely. Then you would tie a hungry dog to the root, place food just out of reach, and retreat to safety while covering your ears. The dog would lunge for the food, pulling up the mandrake, hearing the fatal scream in your place. Elaborate precautions for harvesting mandrake appear in herbalist manuals, medical texts, magical grimoires. The plant's humanoid root shape, its powerful psychoactive properties, its rarity, all contributed to its legendary status. Some mandrake harvesters charged enormous fees for taking the risk. Others claimed to have secret, safer methods passed down through generations. The screaming mandrake was serious business. Medieval people believed that royal blood was literally different from common blood. Kings and queens inherited divine right through bloodlines that made them physically different, spiritually elevated, naturally superior. This wasn't social status, it was biological and spiritual reality. This belief justified monarchy, made rebellion against kings seem unnatural, supported the entire feudal hierarchy. Royal families carefully guarded their bloodlines, married only other royalty, believed their blood carried special qualities that would be diluted by common blood. The king's touch healing scrofula wasn't just about individual kings, it was about royal blood's intrinsic power. Every monarch, by virtue of bloodline alone, possessed this ability. Modern genetics shows blood is blood, but for centuries, the belief in special royal blood shaped European politics, marriage, war, and succession. Medieval people believed that dreams carried prophetic meaning, especially dreams occurring at certain times or in certain places. Dreams during church vigils, dreams on holy days, dreams in sacred locations, these were more likely to contain divine messages. Dream interpretation was serious business, with scholars writing extensive guides to understanding symbolic meanings. Joseph's dream interpretation in the Bible provided precedent. If God spoke through dreams in Scripture, surely he continued doing so. Kings consulted dream interpreters before major decisions. Pregnant women's dreams were examined for signs about their unborn children. Some dreams were thought to come from God, others from demons trying to deceive. Learning to distinguish between divine and demonic dreams required wisdom and prayer. Medieval dream interpretation recognized that not all dreams were prophetic. Some came from indigestion or daily worries, but the possibility that God might speak through dreams meant all dreams deserved careful consideration. Now, breathe slowly. We're approaching the end of our journey through medieval beliefs. Medieval people believed that certain holy sites had healing springs or wells. Water from these locations could cure diseases, restore sight, grant fertility. Pilgrims collected the water in special vessels, carried it home, used it for healing. The belief in sacred water existed across medieval Christianity. From Lourdes to Canterbury, holy wells attracted pilgrims seeking cures. Some sites became famous for specific healings, this well for eye problems, that spring for infertility. Did the water have special properties? In most cases, probably not. But the pilgrimage itself, the journey, the community, the hope, the time away from daily stress, those things did affect health. Belief in healing can activate real healing mechanisms in the body. Medieval people didn't understand placebo effect or psychosomatic healing, but they'd observed that faith and holy water sometimes led to recovery. And finally, let's settle on this. Medieval people believed that their souls would be judged at death, that their eternal fate depended on how they lived. This belief shaped every aspect of medieval life. People endowed monasteries to pray for their souls. They made deathbed confessions. They feared dying without last rites. The belief in judgment and afterlife wasn't unique to medieval times, of course, but the medieval version was particularly vivid and specific. Heaven, hell, and purgatory were real places you would actually go. Angels and demons were real entities that would actually guide or drag you. Your behavior in life had eternal consequences. This belief created both fear and comfort. Fear of damnation motivated moral behavior, charity, penance. Comfort came from knowing salvation was possible, that a sinful life could be redeemed, that God's mercy was available. Whether these beliefs were true hardly matters for understanding medieval minds. They believed. That belief shaped their world. And so our wandering through medieval beliefs comes to a gentle close. We've explored what medieval people truly believed about dragons and saints, about the stars singing and bees grieving, about sacred numbers and dangerous knowledge, about healing and judgment and the shape of the world. These weren't ignorant or foolish people. They were doing what humans always do, observing their world, creating explanations, building frameworks of meaning, trying to understand the vast mysteries of existence with the tools they had. Some of their beliefs we now know were wrong. Some were partially right. Some encoded practical wisdom in mythical form. Some caused terrible harm. Some brought great comfort. You are connected to these medieval believers. Separated by centuries, yes, but connected by the same human need to understand, to make sense of suffering and joy, to find meaning in mystery. We still believe things that future generations will find strange. We still create explanations for what we don't fully understand. The medieval world was stranger and more wonderful than we often imagine. It was a place where dragons were real and bees needed to be told of deaths, where saints healed the sick and numbers reflected divine order, where every comet carried meaning and every holy well offered hope. So wherever you are tonight, let yourself rest in the knowledge that humans have always tried to understand, always sought meaning, always looked up at the stars and wondered. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts settle like dust on those ancient manuscripts where scribes recorded what they believed was true. The stories don't end. They simply wait here, in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking, until you return. Sleep well, traveler, and thank you for wandering with me through the beliefs of medieval minds.